Up the screen, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the refresh rate on the settings probably.
Right.
But picture-wise, it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, looks fine. It looks fine to me. Oh, we're live. Apparently we're live. I was talking to Gerry there, and not paying attention to Sav. There you go. Um, yes. Good evening. Hello. Hello, chat. Let's see who's in. We've got Trevor and Cubana. Oh, just refreshed. Disco Des and Fuzzy Ann and Blaze and Ashley and Andy C and VB and Dinglos and Ridian and Bernice and others. Hello. As you can see, I have with me Gerry Stimson, who's on your screens now. Say hello, Gerry.
Hi, everybody.
And we're going to be discussing the Public Health England report from yesterday. Yes, when we go live in about 20 seconds or so. So here's the bug, and then we'll be back. Good evening, good evening, good evening. It is Thursday. Yeah, it's not Tuesday, it's Thursday, and it's just gone 9 o'clock. And you're watching Vaper Charles TV, and this is Vaper Scene. Yes. I wasn't here on Tuesday. A few technical issues. It wasn't Windows 10 this time, but I know a lot of people are suffering from the upgrades, etc. But no, it wasn't. And as you saw there, just very briefly, I have in the studio tonight via Skype Gerry Stimson. Good evening again, Gerry.
Hi there.
We're going to be discussing the whole Public Health England report that came out this week, and Gerry had a little appearance on the BBC yesterday, which we'll be playing very shortly. But we'll get the titles out of the way first, and then when we come back, we're going to get to it. It's Vaper Scene. Vaper Scene is proudly sponsored by Health E-Vape, UK purveyor of e-cigarettes and Pure Perfection e-liquids. Yes, good evening. Welcome to this week's show. It's been a good week, hasn't it? In certain areas. Never thought I would see the papers with front pages like this at all. There's the Mirror, the Telegraph, the Times, and all the other publications, mainly focusing on the E-Cigs on prescription angle, which we're going to go into very shortly. But first of all, I just want to play you out a little bit of VT, and this is Gerry on the BBC yesterday. Have a little look at this, and then Gerry and I are going to discuss.
Let's go back to our top story now on electronic cigarettes and the report from Public Health England recommending that e-cigs should be prescribed on the NHS. It's after a review found that they're 95% less harmful than tobacco. Well, Gerry Stimson is an emeritus professor of social science from Imperial College London. He specialises in tobacco harm reduction, and he can join us now via webcam. Hello to you, Gerry. Good to see you. Thanks for being with us. First of all, e-cigs on the NHS, does that make sense to you?
Well, I wouldn't put it at the top of my priority list. I certainly want to see more smokers switching to e-cigs, but I think this issue of prescribing is a little bit diversionary. We've got to say, is it needed? If so, for whom? And are there downsides to the idea?
But could save 75,000 lives a year, apparently.
Could save a lot of lives, but the key thing about e-cigarettes is that this has been an extraordinary consumer-led health initiative. There's actually been no encouragement from the NHS or from public health leaders to date, but we've got 2.6 million people using e-cigarettes, and it hasn't cost the taxpayer anything. It's not cost the NHS anything. So we really need to build on that. It's a kind of a market solution to a public health problem. So the question then is, would it be better if GPs could prescribe e-cigarettes? I certainly want GPs to be e-cig friendly, and I'd like them to be e-cig informed, but I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of added value in them prescribing e-cigarettes, and I think there are some considerable difficulties and downsides to it.
So that's interesting. I mean, you're saying that it's the public that have driven this whole move towards e-cigarettes from nicotine and from tobacco in normal cigarettes and so on, and they should basically continue that movement, and maybe the role of government is to continue to inform the public that e-cigarettes are good and get the message out there rather than prescribe them on the NHS.
This report from Public Health England is extremely important because it shows a less harmful than cigarettes. I would probably put it near a 99%. It's okay to use nicotine. Nicotine doesn't cause cancer. The report also says that smoking cessation clinics should be e-cig friendly. There are a lot of things we can do to support this consumer initiative, but prescribing from GPs will not necessarily be part of that. The downsides, if GPs prescribe e-cigarettes, they would have to be medically licensed. This is costly, it's lengthy, it's actually quite cumbersome, and you'd end up really with a lot of rather boring, outdated products. This is a very fast-moving market. Products rapidly become outdated. It takes about 3 years to get a licensed product. So GPs would be extremely limited in what they could prescribe. And there'd be a restriction on consumer choice, because what's fascinating about e-cigarettes is that there's a huge choice out there of types of device, flavors, strengths. That's all actually part of the fun. People are not medicating themselves. They're not going to a GP for help, but they're using devices that they like to use. But there'd be a lack of consumer choice and pretty boring products, I think. The one area where this is important is for people who really can't afford to get on the e-cigarette first stage, because they can't afford it. So maybe starter packs from GPs or starter packs from smoking cessation clinics. But overall, it's not going to make a big contribution. Okay. There are other things that will.
All right, Gerry. I mean, so you're making a big distinction here between e-cigarettes and, say, nicotine patches and gum, which are already prescribed on the NHS.
They are prescribed, and what's interesting is that the use of nicotine patches and gums is declining as the use of e-cigarettes is increasing. So there's a key element there, because gums and patches, they're kind of medicines, aren't they? You go to the doctor, you go to the chemist, and they're a little bit boring and you feel a bit miserable using them. Whereas e-cigarettes are very different to that. They're a device for switching from cigarettes to a safer way of using nicotine. So I can see in limited cases a role for GPs prescribing e-cigarettes, but for the most part, we've got to get information to smokers that e-cigarettes are safer.
Okay.
We've got to make it possible for people to switch.
All right, Gerry, many thanks for that. Gerry Stimson there. Thanks for joining us from Imperial College London. Thank you. Let's go.
And there you go. That was Gerry yesterday on the news. I like the fact that it was the lead story, and we got this a lot yesterday. It was the lead story on a lot of news channels. Just going over what you were saying there, Gerry. Let me put you on the screen.
Right.
You would like to see more smokers to switch, and GPs you'd like to see to be more e-cig friendly and e-cig informed, but you're not particularly enamoured with the prescription thing.
No, I think it's a little bit of a diversion. I mean, we can come back later to think for whom that might be important, but I think the media grabbed this because it's a fairly good story, isn't it? You know, people who perhaps shouldn't really deserve to be prescribed something are going to be using up NHS resources. So it's a little bit annoying that of all the things that are in the Public Health England press statement and in the report, this was the one that much of the media chose to run with. I think the big message is really, you know, coming from Public Health England, the overall endorsement that e-cigarettes are much, much safer than smoking tobacco. And even that message, apart from all the detail of what Public Health England goes into, getting that message ringing out loud and clear is really what we've wanted, because we've had such a lot of scaremongering, naysaying, people, public health directors picking up, you know, little bits of evidence here and there, cherry picking the evidence to try to scare everybody away from this. And there's a danger, as Public Health England said, there's a danger that the public perception of e-cigarettes is that they might not be all that safe. So apart from all the detail there, and we'll come on to the prescribing in a minute, overall yesterday was a hugely successful day for vapers and for e-cigarettes and for smokers. You know, because ringing loud and true was that message, 95% or more less risky than cigarettes. So that's the big thing.
Yeah.
And as I said in the clip on the BBC, prescribing is kind of a bit of a side issue, I think, and I can explain that in a moment.
Yeah, I do have a question actually from chat. Neil has asked from chat. What he says, it's a statement actually. He says he doesn't agree. Why not have a fixed term prescription for vaping equipment in the same way you get a fixed term prescription for NRT? And I can see where he's coming from there. And I know that you have kind of feelings about certain devices, don't you?
Yeah, I think that it's devices, that it's fundamentally that we've been pushing, everybody's been campaigning on this, have been campaigning not for vaping not to be medicalized.
Yeah.
Because the key thing about vaping, as you could tell me, I'm not a vapor, but vaping is fun. You know, for the first time, giving up smoking was interesting and fun. You know, it's not sticking a patch on your arm, it's not chewing some gum, it's not being given something in a boring pack from the chemist or from the doctor. It's a real life and lifestyle choice to switch away from a harmful way of using nicotine to a safer way of using nicotine. So that, you know, most people who make the switch using e-cigs don't see themselves as in need of treatment or medication or whatever. So that's the first issue that I would have about the danger of medicalizing this. The second is about the product, because if you have GPs prescribing, it's not that they will give you a voucher and you can go down the local vape shop or go online and buy what you want. They will only be able to prescribe medically licensed products. And we know that it's incredibly lengthy to get medical licensing for a product. It's extremely expensive. And what you end up with is, after 2 or 3 years of going through that process, you get a product license which is 2 or 3 years out of date. You end up with boring products. You end up with products which don't have the variability, the modifiability, the choice of strengths and flavors. So GPs would end up with prescribing something which is probably not that attractive or not that effective compared with the latest products on the market. So those are the downsides. As I said, there might be, there are some people for whom it might be very important, and there may be ways of doing it which are not around prescribing. For example, some e-cig friendly services give people a starter pack or a voucher to go to, to buy their own equipment. I think it may be important, prescribing may be important for people who really can't get on the first rung of vaping. So for somebody on a low income, it may be that they see it's too risky to invest 30 or 40 pounds of their money on a vaping product. I mean, of course, they are spending a good proportion of their income perhaps on smoking, but it's the £7 or £8 a pack outlay. But it's kind of scary if you're on low income to have to fork out 40, 50 pounds or whatever for a vaping kit. So it may be short-term introduction, and as the chat comment said, on a time-limited basis, as is in fact NRT therapy. So gums and patches. So I said earlier, I think it's diversionary because a lot more can be achieved in other ways, and we don't want to push this whole thing into GP-led, and of course it won't be ever. So that's why I think it's a little bit of a red herring, an important issue, but a little bit of a red herring, just to push home the message, may be very important to help get people started.
Yeah, another comment here from chat. Bernice Evans said it does take a leap of faith to invest on a starter for people with a low income, but at least they can go to a shop and try. And I agree with that, Bernice. It's a leap of faith for any of us that used to smoke, because it was, I think it was about £50 I laid out the first week. That has multiplied many times in the nearly 4 years I've been vaping, I have to say. But interesting thing you said earlier, though, Gerry, in that we as a community, it's been a very consumer-led health initiative.
Yes.
But how many kind of internet TV shows like this do you see about smoking, or about patches, or about NRT? I think the community has made its voice known.
Yes.
And we've been banging on for a long time about the benefits, and it's only now that it's come out, and we're getting professional, on paper reports going to the government. Is this going to make a difference vis-a-vis the TPD? That's the question.
I wish it would, but I don't think it will, because the TPD is very much set in stone, and member states don't have much flexibility in how they implement it. So they really have to take it word for word. Now, there may be some flexibility in how they interpret that word for word, but we are at the moment stuck with it, and that's going to be a huge problem. In particular, the restrictions on advertising and the restrictions on strengths and the container size of on the fluid that can be sold. I think that Public Health England now gets that some pretty daft decisions were made. But remember, the starting point for the TPD was that all products would have to be medically licensed. That was the original proposal in the TPD. We don't have that. And we don't have that because of vapor activism. Don't let us forget that, the power of vapors in Europe, who just push this message home again and again to their MEPs, that this is not, this should not be medicalized. And if the only route was medicines, that would be a disaster. Now, that argument went backwards and forwards, but there was a huge triumph there, and it was a triumph of the European Parliament over the Council and the Commission.
Yeah.
Because very rarely do these things get turned around, and even more, and it's only very rarely that consumers have such an impact. So that's a good bit of history, but we are now stuck with a bit of European legislation which has some daft things in it. How far there is room on, advertising is a key issue, because you read through the lines of Public Health England, and they are in effect saying these things need to be as available as tobacco, and that means they need to be promoted better than tobacco.
Indeed.
The message everywhere should be that these things are available. If you have restrictions on advertising, that is clearly going to be daft. Restrictions on strength, tank sizes, and so on, also going to be daft. I think we'd have to live with it. Whether there'll be any appetite for changing the European legislation, I just don't know. I suspect not, because in fact many countries, in their implementing legislation, that's the legislation they implement, by which they implement the TPD, they are adding on daft things. Spain, I think, restrictions on where the products can be sold. Poland, a ban on internet sales and a proposed ban on vaping in public places. So the difficulty is that as states are putting through their legislation, they're saying, well, if we're putting this through, we'll add on a few extras as well to make things worse. So I really don't know what we do as the next stage, because the TPD is daft of legislation, should never have gone through, should never have had e-cigarettes in a tobacco products directive. They should have been dealt with separately. Where we go, it's unclear to me. What the appetite is for challenge, unclear to me. But certainly we can't live with that forever.
No, indeed. I've got some questions that have come through, Joe. Dream Vaper asks if you think the decision has been made at this time as to aid the MHRA in a push to reassert the campaign for MedRegs.
There's a little bit of that there, but I don't think that can happen. MHRA will, of course, be the agency which regulates products, and we've really got to watch carefully how that is done and the cost of the regulation and so on. I don't, it's a very good question, but I don't pick up on that yet, that it's a rearguard action for medical regulation. I think what it's saying in the PhD report, there's a place for medical regulated devices, but the main market will be in other devices.
Secondary to that then, Sam Monroe has asked, can you clarify, through medical licensing, can a company effectively ignore the TPD? And I think
yes.
that's about the obviously the advertising and everything else.
Yes. Through medical licensing, you're not restricted by the TPD, so you'd have more flexibility in device design, strength, and so on. You're not restricted by the advertising. You don't pay as much VAT, 5% rather than 22% VAT. So there are some advantages there. But Sam, the problem is innovation and development and consumer choice, because every bit of that device, every liquid, every variation in liquid has to be licensed. And I know that one of the companies which has a product going through medical licensing, when they've wanted to vary something, it goes back again, and you have a whole, it's so inflexible, and the kind of the joy of the vaping market is the pun is fluid. It's such a lot of variation and innovation and so on. So there are some advantages with medical licensing, but just look at the lack of innovation with nicotine replacement therapy products.
Mm-hmm.
In 20 years or so, hardly any product development. Yeah, moved on a little bit. You know, you've got patches, you've got gums, you've got inhalers,
Different flavours.
different flavors, but it's not it's not vibrant as a market. So that's, I see the downside to Medrex.
Yes, it's certainly a lot more vibrant than NRT. And if you think of how long that's been going since the first patch came out as well,
Yes,
it's pretty much stayed constant, hasn't it? Now it's a different type of adhesive. It's a clear. You can get clear patches instead of the kind of flesh-coloured ones. They're different inhalators, but it's all the same. And we know that it's less effective than using one of these. And people do use them to quit, and then they stop using them. Whereas, you know, the people that we're talking to, we have replaced the use of lit tobacco with getting our nicotine from these, which is just so much better. And it's refreshing to see that is now being recognised. The danger, I feel, is that the wrong message is going to come out. They're going to cherry pick this, that, and the other, and unless the challenge in the European courts is successful, we're still going to find ourselves in a bit of bother.
We are going to find ourselves in a bit of bother, but if it makes you feel a little better, we're not in such a state of bother as people in many other countries. Now, you know, that's not to say that there aren't problems here, but the UK has really led in being fairly realistic and pragmatic and low-key about this issue. Let's put Wales off to one side, and I can put Wales off to one side because I lived there once, and several generations back, my family came from there. But apart from the ban on vaping in public places issue in Wales, but there are many countries where nicotine is illegal. Australia, it's covered by the poisons regulation, so it's not legal to sell or to possess it. And there's a lovely vaping advocate from Australia, Attila Danko, who some of you may have seen on YouTube.
Yes, we like him.
He says, I'm condemned for choosing the wrong way to stop smoking. So, bad in Australia. In Malaysia, nicotine is illegal. I mean, in all these countries, e-cigarettes are available and they're used because bans aren't effective. There are countries which have outright bans, but there are still people who use. So we've got it better than in many places. And I think the PHE report is something we as a country should sell, make a big play of it. Put together the package that we've got. We've got a government that isn't rushing to ban vaping in public places and not going down that route. We've got a code of advertising practice, which is a fairly, says don't glamorize and don't brand switch. Actually got a code of practice in advertising, which is a very straightforward document. We've got a BSA standard for e-cigarettes, and we've got Public Health England endorsement. So lots of good things. Still,
yes, indeed.
I haven't mentioned my fate noir directors of public health, but we'll come back to them in a minute. But in the big scheme of things, just looking back 2 or 3 years ago, when the TPD was first proposed, and we all thought, this is terrible. How far we've come in dealing with this in a fairly straightforward way. Although, TPD is a mess, should never have happened, and we've still got a lot of people, a lot of medical leaders who are saying daft things and should be ashamed of themselves.
Yes, indeed. We need to just go to a quick break. So when we come back, we'll finish off with Gerry. We'll see you in 2. Vaper Scene is proudly sponsored by Health E-Vape, UK purveyor of e-cigarettes and Pure Perfection e-liquids.
often imitated, never duplicated. Award-winning service and products from cloud9vaping.co.uk.
And now it's back to Vaper Scene on Vaper Trails TV. Vaper Scene is sponsored by Healthy Vape, UK purveyor of e-cigarettes and Pure Perfection e-liquids. Oh, welcome back to part two. Gerry and I were just talking there during the break. I know Gerry has to go, so finally, the kind of big question is, what's the next step, Gerry?
I think there are two next steps. We've already discussed the TPD, and I don't know where we go on that, but I think we have to make an increasingly loud noise about the problems of the TPD. I don't know what that campaign would look like, but there are a few months in which people have to make their voices heard about that. The second area is really what on earth we do about all these directors of public health who really should know better, and it's exemplified by the Faculty of Public Health, and they had such a trite comment on their website in response to the PHE report. It said something like, PHE report confirms that the best way to stop smoking is to use NHS facilities. You couldn't have read the report and just said that one sentence. And the Faculty of Public Health, it comprises all the directors of public health and the public health leaders. They're really in a mess. I mean, interestingly, in the media yesterday, they've been pretty quiet. I mean, some of them were tweeting and plucking weird studies out of the vapor, out of the ether. Press reports from Japan and so on. They're really struggling. But you didn't see them on the television. There wasn't, interesting on television, but in the media, there wasn't too much of trying to strike the balance and rake in McKee and Capel and people like that. So they got a little bit quiet, but they're still there. And in a way, they're going to be helped out of the corner they've got into. And I've got an idea about how that might happen, but that's a problem. Linked to that, we've got a chief medical officer, Sally Davis, who is very anti-e-cig. So this is why I said earlier that PHE has actually negotiated a very interesting passage, with a chief medical officer who they kind of report to, being anti, the Faculty of Public Health being anti, and yet Public Health England has got the allies in to get the science right and to get the statements right. The Faculty of Public Health, sooner or later it's got to come round, and I think this can. I think the way into it may well be through things like stop smoking services. As they become e-cig friendly, they will be saying to their directors of public health, well, look, our numbers were going down, we've become e-cig friendly, now we've got fantastic success rates, something to shout about, and it gives directors of public health a reason to actually congratulate themselves for having good local services. That something's got to happen, and I don't see much sign of that happening. I don't know, I think maybe organisations like the New Nicotine Alliance should perhaps sort of take the bit between their teeth and write to the Faculty of Public Health and say, look, we need to have a round table discussion, vapers and public health doctors, to try to move on from this impasse. But it's difficult. Some of these people are very awkward people, and as I've said on this channel before, the bizarre thing is that many directors of public health, many public health leaders are very pro harm reduction when it comes to illicit drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them are in favour of drug policy reform, but they've got themselves into a real corner over e-cigs. And a real corner, I think, because they've been very much influenced by a few people like Martin McKee and others. So they've had this narrative of risks and fears. You know, what about the children? We don't know what's in them. The whole of tobacco control will collapse. There'll be more people smoking. You know, it's a risk and fear narrative rather than a proper attempt to engage with the evidence and the science. So, and again, I'm not sure what that campaign might look like, but if one thing we should be grateful for, that the lead body in England for Public Health England, has come out strongly. So it pushes the dinosaurs amongst the other public health leaders into a little bit of a corner. And I think we need to find, you know, as with all disputes, we need to find ways to help them get out of the corner and come over to the right way of thinking. But, you know, let's be optimistic about that.
Yeah, I just wonder if the naysayers would be as anti if some of the pension funds that may be invested in weren't so heavily invested, say, in pharma or big tobacco, and they were invested heavily in e-cigs, because I know a lot of pension funds do invest heavily, lots of money into tobacco and pharmaceutical companies. So I'm just, you know, am I being too cynical here?
No, I don't think you are. I mean, a lot of people say the influence of pharma on doctors and public health. I think there is an unwelcome closeness in some cases. I mean, there are conferences on smoking cessation which are almost entirely funded by pharma companies, and that has to stop. I mean, people who've aligned themselves with pharma in that way, I mean, it's going to backfire on them, you know, eventually. I think this is more a kind of an ideological and philosophical issue for many directors of public health who hate industry and they hate the tobacco industry, and they hate the idea that there might be a market solution to a public health problem, and they hate the idea that somebody else has come up with a good idea, and they didn't come up with the idea first. So they kind of lost control of the whole area that they once were in charge of, and they were all knew what they had to do. But suddenly, you got all these companies coming along, and consumers and the market are looking after a public health problem. So it's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable for them. You know, they're no longer leading on this. So, you know, there are lots of twists and turns here, and I can see where many of them are coming from. You know, we've had decades of fighting tobacco companies, quite rightly, decades of pushing for stricter controls on smoking. And then along comes something like e-cigs from left field that they hadn't even thought of, and is a much better solution than the one they've been pushing. So, you know, who knows where it will go, but it can't go on forever. You know, sooner or later they've got to come round to it.
Indeed. It's definitely going to be an interesting few weeks and months, I must say,
yes.
As we head into 2016 and the impending doom of the TPD. Gerry, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have to go, so I've probably kept you more than you were going to be here. So thank you so much for coming on, and I'm sure chat is as appreciative as I am, and hopefully we can get you on again in the near future.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much for all of the viewers tonight.
Thanks, Gerry. We're going to go to a bit of ET now, and after that we're going to go into another break. But before that, the Sigelei 150 that I showed you on last week's show, this was going to be on Tuesday, but here is his part one. Yeah, see what you think. Now, you may have seen on last week's show that I was using this device that I picked up at Vapefest, and it is, as you can see, a Sigelei 150 watt temperature control. Yeah, so let's take it out of the box. Now, I have been using it, obviously. You get your lovely kind of rubberized coating. It seems to be a lot more robust than the coating on the Vaper Shark. I have to say. Let me zoom in a little tad for you, and then you can see it a little bit better. There we go. So here we have the unit itself. 510 connection on the top. Fits well in my hand, but then, as you know, I've got big hands. I'll just show you what's in the rest of the box, which is not a great deal, I have to say. You've got a warranty card with a little QI scanner thing on it. There we go. Got one of those. And you have a user manual which tells you all the different things you can do and what they mean. So you can have a look at that. You also get pre-installed one of these, which is a silicone cover. It's a tad difficult to get on and off, I have to say. There you go. So I've left it off for the purposes of showing you. On the side here you've got your battery compartment, which you just pull out. It's got a little bit of magnetic connections as well. A couple there and a couple there, just to keep everything in. And then you'll see two spaces for your batteries, because this does take two 18650 batteries. Now, at VapeFest, Talk to the Battery Boy was selling batteries, had some good deals on. So I've got two sets of these, which are IMR 18650, 250 milliamp hour, 4.3 volt, and I've got two sets. I've labelled them 1 and 2, and I'm going to use them exclusively for this, and then I've got two matched pairs. You'll see on the bottom here you've got a plus and a minus, so obviously you put the batteries in thus. Now, just let you show, I'll just show you here, there's quite a good copper connection. You can see that there, as opposed to big springs. And they seem fairly robust, and there's quite a bit of resistance behind there. So minus to that end, plus to that end, and then I'll just put in the little battery removal tool, and this is minus, so obviously plus goes the other end, and we are batteried up. Side panel on, which is a lot easier to do when you're not trying to do it on camera. There we go. Side panel on, and then we have our buttons. I've left a little plastic cover on this, just so it keeps nice. So you should still see it. And as you can see, nothing happens until I start pressing buttons. So let me zoom in a tad further for you, and then you can see it closey uppy. There we go. Keep it in shot. So it's 5 clicks basically, turn it on. And there we go, we are on. And you will see the top tells you the wattage, the one next to that tells you the voltage, the one underneath that tells you the resistance of the atomizer, and then the other one tells you the charge left in your batteries. And at the moment they are at 44%, which is a bit crazy. Have I charged them? I possibly haven't charged them. Anyway, we've got enough to be going on with. Menu wise, obviously to change your wattage or your temperature control later, and for all the menu functions you've got your up and down buttons here, and then of course your fire button, and it will say check atomizer because there's nothing on the top. If we do 5 clicks on the fire button, that gets us into the menu system, and then to cycle through the choices you then press your fire button again. So at the moment we're saying system on. If I went left or right, that would turn the unit off thus. So system goes off, then we're back into 5 clicks to turn it back on again, and now the battery's gone up to 87%. I knew there was more charge in it, it just needed a little bit of a jolt. 5 clicks into the menu system, a click again, then that takes you to either power mode or mode joule, which is basically temperature control mode. It displays in joules, which are a little bit more complicated, because to get the exact wattage you divide the joules by the length of the inhalation, which is a bit crazy. So I'll go back to power mode for the moment, and then you've got exit on off and system on off. That's it basically. You won't get into the temperature control mode unless you're in dual mode, so let's go into dual mode for now. Once you're in dual mode, if you then press your fire button, you then get the choice of Fahrenheit or centigrade. Then you press your fire button again, and then you can set your temperature, and at the moment it's set at 518. It goes all the way up to 572, and then all the way down. If I hold the button down, it will go all the way down to 212. I like mine at about 500, so I'm going to take that back up to 500. Let's get in there. There we go. Press your fire button and then exit. Exit. And then you can see your temperature is set to 500. And the joules are currently 18.1. I've kind of been using it like I would and having joules as watts basically. Don't know why they decided to use joules. I know some other devices do the same thing as well. So we're going to put a device on this, but before we do, I'm going to change it back into power mode because I'm going to be using a non-temperature controlled device. And like I said, I've been using this now since VapeFest, and I rather like it. Yeah, it's performing rather well. So I'll put this aside for 1 second, and what we're going to look at is this, which is the Smok TFV4. Yes, and you can see from the picture on there that it's a top filling device, and it comes with, let me show you around that way, it comes with an RBA head, it comes with a triple coil head and also a quadruple coil head and spare parts. Now I've kept this unopened since VapeFest so I could show you. So let's open it up, and you can see as I unbox it what we get in this little unit. Now I did have a go on one when I was at VapeFest, and I have seen other people's in use, so I know what to expect. And slide out the outer cover, and here we go. Helps if you've got some nails really to get this bit. Okay, dangerous, do not eat. Get rid of that for the minute. That's the tank itself. We'll just keep that one side. You get some instructions on what to do. You get a little attention card. Once you detect a loss in flavour, please refill the tank to avoid burning. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You get a little packet of wicking material. And then here we go. A spare Pyrex tank, which is always good. You get some little protection ring things. Yeah. A black screwdriver as opposed to a blue screwdriver. A spare silicone top section for the filling section. Get rid of those in a minute. And then here are the beasts. Now, look at the size of that. That is absolutely immense. This is a 4-coil. And let me move these out of the way for a second so you can see. Absolutely huge. So this is the quad coil, and it's vertical. I'll zoom in for you so you can see a little bit better. If it'll focus. There we go. You can see this is a vertical coil, and it says on it, there's a little 4 coils symbol on there. And I must get some new glasses. It looks like 0.35 actually on there. So here's the tank itself, and you can see it is rather chunky indeed. Airflow control at the bottom, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, and you can see that is going to pump a lot of air through. There's also airflow on the top, on the top section, and a 510 drip tip connector. So you can use the airflow on the drip tip, or you can shove your own 510 in there. It's got a double O-ring to keep it in place. Put that back in. Filling wise, you slide the top section, and there we go, filling through the little slot as opposed to the big hole, because that's your airflow, but filling in through that slot, and then you just push it closed. I can see that if it's in a pocket, possibly moving. To swap it over, we're going to unscrew the top section. Yes, more in a moment because we're going to go into the break very shortly. But if you look here, it's the Sigelei, the E-Cigs VT, and then the Vaper Shark. You can see the difference in size. If I hold them that way around, there you go. You can see it's quite a bit wider. No USB charging, which is going to put people off. It would be nice if it had USB charging, I must say. It doesn't look homemade, as someone said. I can't remember who that was as I was scanning through chat. It looks and it feels like a decent build, and I looked at quite a few when I was there, and it was 60 quid, which is not too bad at all. As you can see, the batteries, I got the 2 sets of batteries, and I bought 2 sets specifically because they are effectively stacked. So I've got 2 brand new sets of pairs, and they're numbered 1 and 2. So one's on charge, one's in there, and it's working rather nicely. You'll see in the next segment I go into a bit more about the tank, and then I can fill you in on the rest after. We are going to go slightly over because Gerry and I did talk for quite a while. So we're going to go into the ads. When we come back, you can get part 2. Yes. Vaper Scene is proudly sponsored by Health E-Vape, UK purveyor of e-cigarettes and Pure Perfection e-liquids.
Vapers, Dripper just got 40% bigger. So if you love discovering new e-liquids, tell Dripper what flavours you like and we'll send you 70ml of juice and at least 5 flavours. With a money back guarantee and free delivery anywhere in Europe, dripper.co.uk.
What's in this E-Cig cloud? Harmless water vapour, right? Pretty much, yes. Compared to a lit cigarette, it's much safer than smoke. But it contains nicotine, and nicotine on its own isn't toxic and doesn't cause cancer. If you're worried about switching to vapour, here are some facts. No tar, no smoke, no burnt tobacco. Cooking your evening meal produces more toxins than are found in exhaled vapour. Tobacco smoke contains toxins at very high levels, and Vaper does not. And that Vaper contains 6,000 times less carcinogens than cigarette smoke. Electronic cigarette Vaper. There's nothing to be frightened of. The only dangerous electronic cigarette is a banned one.
And now it's back to Vaper Scene on Vaper Trails TV. Vaper Scene is sponsored by Healthy Vape, UK purveyor of e-cigarettes and Pure Perfection e-liquids. And we are indeed back in the room. And like I said, we are going to go slightly over by about 6 minutes, I think, this week. Yes. So we're going to go straight into the next little segment. Enjoy. There we go. Now that is the size of it. It's crazy. Crazy big. That's the triple coil, that's the quad coil, and they're both vertical, but the triple coil, as you can see there, has got 3 coils surrounded by the wicking material. Slightly different, but and is the which is pre-coiled, and that is your standard coil. Now, what concerns me slightly is this, because this looks like the same material that was on the sub tanks until it was swapped over. So I'm nervous about that. I might put some spearmint juice in just to see if it melts, but then I don't know if that's an issue yet. I haven't done a lot of googling on this unit so far. So that is coiled up ready. Now, I was advised when using this section to pack this mega full of wicking material to prevent leaks. So we'll use that at some point, but not today. So that's going back in the box. So what I'm going to do is use the triple coil on this one. So, tank is out for the moment, and I'm going to use the triple coil today. Yes, there we go. God, that is immense. Screw into the bottom, and it's just hand tight. Don't want to over tighten it. And you can see there is some big wicking holes there. Now I'm going to use this Odin juice. There we go. Going to use this Odin juice, and it's a high VG juice, but because these slots are so big and there is so much here to soak up the juice, I don't think that's going to be an issue. And I'm not even going to prime the coils. I'm just going to fill it up and let it soak in, I think, on this occasion. So I'm going to put the glass tank back on and then screw this in, and you'll see that's the little O-ring. So the one that was in the other atomizer is a spare for that, and that screws into the top. So that's going to get offered up. And hand tight. I'm going to close the airflow off and then we'll fill up. And I think what I need to do is grab a syringe so I can fill up this tank, because I don't think the dropper's going to be any good. Okay, I have a syringe full of liquid, and I'm just going to slide the top section. And this juice is 6 milligram, and like I said, it's a heavy VG juice, but I don't think it's going to be an issue. Time will tell. Now that is 2.5 mils. It takes 3. And what I'm going to do is just give it a little bit more juice. Drawing juice one-handed, holding the tank in the other, because that level will go down. There we go. As it soaks into the coil, and then you simply close the top, and there we go. We are full. So I'm going to let that soak in for a while, and then what I'm going to do, in fact I'll do it now, is I'm going to put it on the Sigelei 150, because then I can really give it some power. I'm going to open the airflows up, and the level's already going down as it soaks in. And according to the mod, it's 0.22 ohms. That coil, or the tri-coil, is 0.22 ohms. And this is currently set at 27 watts. So I'm just going to take that. I'm going to start it at 25, I think. Start at 25 watts. So I'm just going to leave that to soak in for a few minutes, and then we'll be back. So here we go. This is the Sigelei 150 with the Smok TFV4 with the triple coil installed, with the Odin juice, which was the high VG juice. I've given it a few blasts, and I've decided that 40 watts is a good starting point. Yes. I've also closed off the top airflow, and I've put the bottom airflow to half. Yeah, as you can see there. There we go. I'll give it a blast for you. And as you can see, it's definitely a producer. Absolutely a producer. The juice, I don't particularly like, I have to say, and I'm really sorry, Ash, who gave me the juice. I'm not really a big fan of tobacco flavours. I thought I'd give it a go, but not for me, I have to say. But so far, I'm impressed with the actual Sigelei 150, because I've been using it up in Scotland last week, with other devices on. I had a Limo 2 on there, I've had a sub tank on there, I've also had the Tube Tank Plus on there, all on temperature control. This isn't temperature control, it's on wattage, it's on power mode, but I have to say, rather nice. It's rather warm as well. Just feeling the actual atty, it's the tank, it is rather warm, but that's to be expected because there's 40 watts going through it. It seems to be wicking rather nicely, even at the high VG. Nice clouds of vapour there. And I will be trying some other juice. So I'm going to vape the rest of this, and then I'll put something else in, and I'll try a more PG to VG ratio juice, and something a little fruitier, which is more to my taste. But it looks nice on the Sigelei. It's a nice size unit. So if I compare the Sigelei with a Vaper Shark RDNA40, you can see the difference in size. Quite considerably bigger, and I've no drip tip on the sub tank at the moment, but you can see, even if I put it towards so the tanks are lined up, it's a considerably bigger footprint than the Vaper Shark. But for me, that's not a problem because, as you know, I'm 6'5" and I've got big hands. So to me that's actually a nice fit, and if I compared that to, say, you know, an iLeaf or an iStick, it would be like, yeah, tiny. But there you go. So Sigelei 150, Smok TFV4. I'm going to be using it over the next few days, and I will let you know more findings on Tuesday's show. Yeah, so that'll be tonight then. Yes. So it's back to the studio.
Hello, little update for you on the Sigelei 150 with the Smok TFV4. I've been using it now for a couple of days, and firstly the tank decided to wet itself after I filmed the first little section. I had that Odin juice in it, which I didn't quite like, but you know, there you go. So maybe it was a blessing that it leaked everywhere, I don't know. What I noticed was I put one of those little plastic rings that I showed you on this section here, and there's a gap here, well, obviously where you open it to fill, and I wondered whether that had caused a pressure difference and that's why it all leaked. But it all leaked out at the bottom, so I had to take it apart, clean it, and then refill with some more juice, which I did. And I've been vaping on it quite nicely, and it does produce a heck of a lot of vapor. Let me show you. It does produce lots of vapor, and that was at 50 watts. And I'm just going to open my window slightly now because I'm not driving. It's not sucking all of the vapor out again, so look a little bit vapory in here now. So yes, you can see just by how much vapor is still floating around that it produces rather well indeed. What it doesn't do for me is give me any flavour. I'm not really finding the flavour. I didn't find the flavour on the first juice that leaked everywhere, and I'm not finding it on this either. And this is a Mad Mike's juice in here, and Mad Mike's juices are really flavoursome. I like them a lot, I have to say. And I've got a Mad Mike's juice in here. It's a heavy PG, but it's wicking well. You can see it's producing well. I'm not getting any dry hits. But what I'm not getting is huge hits of flavour. Yes, it's producing vapour, but it's not hitting it really for me with the flavour thus far. I'm going to continue on with it. I'm going to try some different juice as well, just to see, and then I'll move on to the quad coil, and then what I will do is I'll rebuild the rebuildable, but I'll make it a temperature controlled coil and not the coil that's in it, and see if that makes a difference, if actually having it as a temperature controlled unit brings the flavour out or not. But for me at the moment, yes, it's producing lots of vapour. It's not really all that satisfying for me though, because I'm not getting the flavour. And for me, it's all about the flavour before the clouds. Clouds are secondary to me. Flavour first, clouds second. The jury is out thus far. I'm going to keep using it. And like I said, different juice, different coils, and I'll see what happens. And I'll update you on next week's show. Yeah. Anyway, back to the studio.
And we're back. Hello. I have continued using it. I've got some Elements key lime pie in here at the moment, and it is giving me more flavour. Maybe the coil needed to bed in a bit more. It's still more of a cloud chasing tank than it is a flavour tank, as someone has just said. I think Liana said it's a cloud chasing tank, and it is really a cloud chasing tank. I love the top filling section. I think it's very, very good indeed, and you can get the smaller bottle ends into that because it's flexible, it's not solid. So we'll see. Like I said, the jury's still out. I'm going to finish the juice that I've got in it now, and then tomorrow probably I'll put the quad coil in and use that until next week, and then I'll just give you a little update on the show next week. Now we are way over time because Gerry and I did talk quite a lot. So thank you for holding on and carrying on watching. Next week, yes, let's talk about next week. Monday, it's going to be the old gits. They are going to be on at 9 o'clock on Monday. Tuesday, it'll be myself, and next week I will have Dimitris Agiotis on with me, and we're going to be talking about what's happening in America and how they have taken the news that we've had over in the UK this week. So that should be good. Tune in for that. Wednesday you will have Matt with the cave, and then Thursday Dave Dawn is back. Oh yes, he'll probably be really tanned, and hopefully he's got over his hangovers from drinking all the gin by the pool in the Canary Islands. But yes, Dave Dawn will be back next week. So it's going to be a fun packed week next week, guys, so tune in, and vape happy is the thing. Yeah, and we'll see you in chat. So thanks once again for tuning in, and I'm just looking for my credits. There they are. Yes, I will see you next week. Until then, have a good week. Tatty bye. Vaper Scene is proudly sponsored by Health E-Vape, UK purveyor of e-cigarettes and Pure Perfection e-liquids.